Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Mind Adventures Presents Theatre in the Apocalypse. Our guest today is Thusitha Jayasundera, and I'm going to introduce her shortly. Thusitha Jayasundera graduated from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in 1993. After that, she joined the Royal Shakespeare Company for some time, and then has also gone on to enjoy a very long relationship over the years with the National Theatre. So she's worked with really big institutions, as well as independent theatres and companies like the Finborough, Out of Joint, and the Donmar Warehouse. And that is particularly why I wanted to talk to Thusitha, and why I wanted to ask her to share her opinions, because she has been in every situation, really, working with, big corporations and tiny ones. And I mean, it's very difficult to encapsulate a career that spans over 20 years in a few minutes. So I'm not going to try and do that. I'm just going to give you a few highlights in order to introduce you to her. So yes, I mean, over the years, she's worked with these legendary names that we've heard of in theatre, like John Barton, Tim Supple, Max Stafford Clark, Nigel Douglas. And also, I mean, she's over the years had very favorable reviews. I came across one review by the legendary British theatre critic Michael Billington, and he describes her performance in Matthew Wilkinson's My Eyes Went Dark as one of supreme finesse. And actually, there's more than one critic that has hailed her performance in David Hare's The Vertical Hour as worthy of Olivia. So most recently, Thusitha has been in Blank, written by Alice Birch, and that's about women in the criminal justice system. Just before that, Stories by Nina Rain, which would have closed in about November last year, Thusitha. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. And before we really get into the main topic of what we're discussing here, I just want to take a small detour because, and I know especially for a lot of Sri Lankans, you are a pioneer. Sorry, I can't say the word pioneer without thinking of kind of burly big men with beards kind of shooting animals or looking for gold or something. But you're a pioneer in the sense of, in your profession, being a person of color, but more than that, being a woman of color, which seems like a double whammy. And you have worked your way up. I mean, I remember, I think it was your first show out of Radha, Peer Gynt. Would it have Peer Gynt at the Swan? And I remember seeing that, and I can never forget your character's name. It was Hoo Hoo, and you've sort of had this. You've had to really work at it over the years, but you've gone from playing minor roles to a show like My Eyes Went Dark by Matthew Wilkinson, in which there are only 12 characters and you play 11 of them. And then also with The Vertical Hour by David Hare, I mean, it is acknowledged as the biggest stage role ever written for a woman. And so you got to that point, but it hasn't really been a meteoric rise, has it? I mean, you really had to, I mean, I want to hear it in your own words, but why do you think that was?
It's hard to say, Tracy, but I think that there is a point in every artist's life when they sort of pop, and they pop the kernel, as it were. And I don't mean that they suddenly ascend to stardom or become, great sort of household names or anything like that, but actually they come to fruition in their own artistic life. Something happens. There's a kind of an understanding that suddenly comes into being after many, many years of just trucking along and working stuff out. And that trajectory used to be commonly something that spanned 20 years. So all of the people from the generation, say about 4 or 5 generations before, like the likes of, the big British names like, I don't know, Judi Dench and Ian McKellen and all of that. There's a similar kind of long, slow kind of burn that culminated in them becoming household names because they entered television and film. And so, but the actual industry and the way that the industry markets its actors is very different now, and it was changing as I was graduating. So the people in my year were the last of our lot, if you like, to be stuck between two stools. So the business was changing and following an American model. So,
Right.
for instance, the whole business of very young actors being shot stratospherically through to sort of starring roles in films. Those sorts of things kind of never happened when I was at drama school. That was a very, very rare thing. And then it became kind of like 2 or 3 folk in a year might have that opportunity of just being propelled by something that cannot really be attributed to experience because they haven't had any, So there are that propel certain people. In my case, I think I'm a plodding person. I go very slowly. I'm also quite reclusive, as you know.
Oh, really?
And so, and I think the combination of all of these things yes, there weren't, I was the only Asian student in our year at RADA.
Yeah.
And any kind of job that you had on television was very, very marginal. People weren't interested in casting you or entertaining you as a kind of a lead or even a sidekick. That wasn't part of the equation at the time. So you'd go up for these tiny peripheral parts and be frustrated. And luckily for me, I sort of, and this is very important for young actors, that somebody champions them. Somebody decides that there's something about them that is worth nurturing and kind of honing in some way. And I had the great good fortune of having that person in John Barton, who I didn't know was such a big deal at the time. All I knew was he was a beardy old guy who used to do a lot of shows at the RHD, and he was fun and he was nice. I didn't really know very much about him, which was also quite an asset because I was free from any of that kind of adulation and that kind of nervousness that attends being directed by somebody quite grand. Yeah. So we hit it off, and he kept using me for stuff, and he kept calling upon me and talking to me and trying to push me in various directions. And he was somebody who really had a very deep understanding of actors, and he very quickly understood what kind of a person you were and what kind of an actor you were and what things would stimulate you and what things you would run a mile from.
Okay.
And so I had the great fortune I had was having somebody like him sort of steering me quite strongly right at the beginning. But then, it's no secret. I mean, if you're not white and you're not male, then you are going to to be sort of on a slower track, a much slower track. And in Britain particularly, if you're quite sort of I don't think it's an accident that people who are public school and kind of confident and entitled in that particular way seem to sort of fare very well, getting themselves on the right track, because it is about feeling ease. It is about saying, yes, I'm here and this is what I'm doing, and feeling that entitlement without having to work
Right.
at it.
Yeah.
So and those things, I think, to me it started to happen at a much slower rate, because when I went to RADA, I hadn't decided to become an actor. I hadn't made any kind of decision about anything, really. I was like you guys. Well, you were a couple of years waiting. We were just waiting for the schools to start, because everything was shut down,
Yeah.
And I was about to sit my A-levels, and everything just collapsed. So then I was trying to sit sort of other types of A-levels to try and get ahead, but that was a bit of a hiding to nowhere. And the person that sort of propelled me to RADA was my brother, because he'd been told by Richard time and time again, this is Richard Thusitha, who had seen me in plays, to push for some kind of formal training to do it.
Yeah.
But I had no personal investment in it. I didn't take it seriously, because why would you? I mean, why would you? It's a hobby. It's something that you're just larking about. You're not doing it seriously. So the one thing, when I think back to that time, I'm not convinced about how accurate my actual memories are. I think most of it is sort of retrospective thoughts. But one thing that I remember is feeling quite passive and being just kind of carried along this wave, and not really understanding or knowing, or just being there. And that sort of passiveness took a long time to sort of recalibrate into something that matched up with things I might do or not do on stage. Do you know what I mean? It's a kind of an odd one.
Yeah.
It's like
I understand.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
I was going to say I understand that passive thing, and that's one thing about sort of when people like us were sort of 18 or 19 and 18 or 19-year-olds now. There's just this world of difference, and I do understand that essence of what you're talking about. You just kind of drifted along, and then one day you woke up and went, "Oh wait, I'm here now. I have to do this thing."
Yes, and being surrounded, and also the other thing is that I was surrounded by people who had worked so hard and they every pore in their body was screaming out, "I want to be an actor. I want to be a performer. This is my this is my place in life." And I simply didn't feel that, so I felt like a fraud, being surrounded by people who had auditioned 7, 8, 9 times, spent so much money traveling to central London, paying the audition fees, doing all that stuff, being skint, but putting everything they had into this process.
Yeah.
And there I was, having just plopped in. So so that was quite an incongruous, strange sort of feeling. I was waiting to be found out, I think, for a long time.
You're fraud. Well, I think people found you for sure. Do you think, again, and I'm just trying to steer it back to like sort of using the lens of being a person of color, have opportunities changed a lot for people now, young people now?
Yes, they have. Yeah.
And if you can, what do you attribute that to? Because you also went along that process, so you have the experience. Where do you think it started to change, and how has it changed?
Well, I think I think one of the things that happened is that the migrant population of, I mean, I talk about England because I know it now, that you go through that period where you are an immigrant and you're struggling to settle down and earn a living and, to just batten down the hatches, survive. And it's a kind of a survival that is actually happening. So you do not actively encourage your children to become artists if you actively discourage it. So then in that way, you lose a generation of people becoming actively involved in the arts. And then that survival, that struggle becomes less. And the older generation relax. And then the kids look around them and kind of go, I like that. I like to do that. I'd like to try that, whatever. Mm. And then suddenly you start seeing bubbling up a lot of people applying for drama schools, I don't know, signing up for talent shows, singing, all kinds of things start to happen. You suddenly start to see more people of various different ethnic backgrounds putting themselves forward. Yeah. And then thereafter there starts this kind of like, what do you call it, ferment. And then people start getting more and more dexterous, more and more skilled, more and more confident, more and more identified, using their backgrounds lucidly through their works. And then you start to have people who start writing texts. And once you have people writing, then there is a big shift that happens. And then everybody starts to take notice.
Yes. I remember again very
and
early.
I think that's what's sort of happened. And I mean, there's been so many more voices going. You look at the television and we don't see reality reflected on the screen. Where are these people? There's been quite a clamor from quite sort of established figures, and so slowly that's taken root. But it's very slow. Okay. I mean, regardless of all the clamor, it's still slow. Yeah. But it is a lot better though. Mm-hmm.
I remember in Pentecost sitting in that audience and having this moment of wow when you told that story in Sinhala.
Yes.
And that was really a special moment for me. And I was kind of looking around that theater going, I think I'm the only person here who actually understands what you're saying. But that was a powerful kind of it's happening a little bit. And then I sort of looked at the characters that you've played on television, and you have played Ramani DeCosta on the bill, Tushara Bandara in Holy City, and Ros Mahendra in Dr. Foster. So, were you cast as a Sri Lankan, or did you ask to be a Sri Lankan? Did you name your characters yourself?
No, Ros Mahendra was something that they had decided on, and I think that particular it wasn't really discussed. Ros Mahendran sounds like an Indian. It sounds more like an Indian name than it does a Sri Lankan name. With Holby in the bill, when you're booked to play a regular part, you go through a different sort of actors that might be coming in to play guest leads or guest parts. So they sit down with you and they sort of out this kind of idea that they have, and then they sort of say, well, we would like her to be as close to you as possible in terms of her ethnicity and what right. She's called and blah, blah, blah. So you have a kind of a discussion about it and you decide between you. So that's how that,
Okay. Thank you for that. Can I just ask, you're joining us from Auckland, New Zealand right now. What can you say about what you're doing there, how you come to be there during lockdown?
I came to do a job, and I was filming I stopped filming about a week and a half before lockdown happened. And it's a long job, and it's an absolutely huge project, huge thing, and well, they're very, very sort of circumspect about letting us talk about it, because they want to do this big reveal and blah blah blah. So
Sure.
it's a television series, and it's you know, it's all bells and whistles, massive thing, and I'm here for. I mean, I've been booked for over a year, so I'm here for that duration, and I don't know what the lockdown situation is, how it's all going to pan out. I have no idea, because they intend to start filming again in October, and I think they're sort of quite steely about that.
Okay.
But you know, this is like no other thing, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, was it weird to stop halfway? I mean, you're working, you're in character, and then suddenly... Have I gone? So what I was asking was, did that feel weird? And being in character and working, and then suddenly it stops. And I'm just asking because I was also about to open a show in Pakistan, and my actors kind of, I can't describe it. You know, it's like you're suspended. Did that feel weird?
Yes and no. I mean, the thing is that with screen work, it's all fragmented anyway. So you don't. I mean, yes, you are completely invested in it, because you've traveled thousands of miles to be here, to start work, to do all this stuff. You are incredibly invested in it, but it doesn't have the same. Anyway, for me, I think I might have filmed about 3-4 sort of proper scenes, and a lot of milling around and doing stuff in the back, that kind of in the background scenes. So I just started, and it doesn't have that same, you're gathering steam, you're just about to hit the runway, and that thing that you do when you're doing a theatre show, you just don't get that feeling. So when it stopped, part of me was like, oh, a bit of a holiday. Oh, yeah, we can sort of put this on the back burner and think of something else.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. Right. Let's just kind of come to the main topic of conversation, which is theatre in the apocalypse. What are we going to do? What does the future of live performance look like to us? And I'm just going to ask you to indulge me in imagining what that future could be. So what do you love most about live performance, about being on stage?
Well, I think what I like about theatre, I think it's one of those things that I share with virtually all of the acting fraternity, which was we all come from a slightly persecuted background. We're all kind of quite bullied kids, or there's something that makes us want to assert a degree of control over life. And theatre is the perfect way. You have distance. You're setting yourself back on a stage where nobody can really get you unless you get really close. But by and large, there is a safe distance, and you have control over your responses to things. And every day you can go back and make that better. So you have control of trying to make it better. And it's sort of a control that you just never get in life, to be the best version of yourself. So so that's what theatre gives you. It's not quite the same with screen somehow. although you can keep going back and back and back. There's something about living it together with the whole audience of people.
Yeah.
To feel the energy feeding off each other, which becomes very addictive, and you do feel it when you haven't done theatre for a long time. You feel a lack, and that is to do with something that the audience brings for you like a gift every evening. And I think there are loads of pictures going around Facebook, aren't there, of a theatre in Berlin with the seats spaced out, and it's a very, very strange and desolate thing where you have sort of socially distanced seats.
I was saying we've done some research, and the idea of socially distanced theatre, so you have like a 600-seater or an 800-seater, and you'll maybe be able to have 200 people in there, which is disastrous.
I don't know what, how, when. It's just impossible to predict.
It is. It is impossible to predict. It's impossible to know how to go forward, because it seems to me, especially in addition to social distancing and the fear, it's going to really affect companies financially. You won't be able to recoup your investments, and I think even massive institutions like the National, how long can they sustain supporting their staff and their actors and running at a loss? It's not practical, is it?
Well, they're begging for a bailout at the moment. They're begging the government for a bailout, and the big institutions like the National and the RSC, that's one thing. They're like sort of leviathans, kind of teetering and toppling. But then there is a whole raft of musicians, improvisers, performers of all sorts, who don't actually come within the radar of those places. That is the thing that is very, very difficult to see how that is going to be sustained.
I think all those things are just very short term, with people hoping that things will sort of blow over faster than they are going to blow over, really, in terms of this virus. I've been reading online a lot about this, and there's I've seen messages from the artistic director of the Donmar warehouse or the Royal Exchange or whatever. A lot of people are asking for money, like you were saying, asking for a bailout, or telling audiences, if you have bought a ticket, please don't ask for a refund. Let us support our artists with that. But there's equally a lot of people saying, well, theatre has been dying for centuries. It's clearly going to live on. It will. But this is time for a massive reset. We have to really rethink how live theatre goes forward. There's a lot of people saying that live theatre these days has become very non-inclusive, and there's so many people who cannot be a part of the experience. It's too expensive, mostly. And so in that environment, if you could, what would you change about the way theatre works right now?
I think it has to be taken away from these august buildings in some way, and there has. I don't really know, Trace, but I think it has to be much more sort of socially engaged, because no matter what people say, like you say, an average ticket, if you can't get on Travelex for the National, whatever, is a minimum of 30 quid. It's a lot of money. The whole streaming thing is very. It means that lots more people get to see what's being made, but then it's not theatre. It's it's a live stream of a piece of theatre.
That's
you know
my
what I mean? So I don't really know how you actually get the bodies together, because that's what it finally boils down to is having a lot of bodies in one room.
Yeah. And I don't know if, like me, you've tried
apart from just persevering with this socially distant seating malarkey, and just persevering with it and seeing what it does, what it brings with it, you know. And maybe it might generate a very, very particular type of theatre that nobody foresaw, you know, but just engaging with the circumstances very wholeheartedly and seeing what happens, and then trying to develop what happens. But it's very difficult to sort of, because it's such a kind of theatre is not generated sitting around chatting about it, is it? It's always generated by actually doing. So to find a way of facilitating a doing of something, with people present, with the actors present and everybody there as is within the circumstances, is the only way that you could find out what is possible. Well, I mean, I think radio will. I think this might be a real flowering of radio, actually. Radio drama. It might be a real flowering of that. I don't know. I've had a very tenuous relationship with radio drama. I've only had like 2 really fantastic experiences with it when I thought, that is really fantastic. I don't know why it is. It somehow, but and I think that people are seriously finding a way through on film and on kind of big budget television, as far as I can tell. They're really working out the possibilities of how shooting can take place, and I think people are shooting stuff at the moment, like, you know, the crew is
a lot,
like swaddled in COVID kind of protective gear, and they're doing stuff. All of those things, it's just the kind of communal live performance. That's the thing, the coming together and being together.
Yeah, I mean, I think
other. That's the thing. That's, you know,
it's gone for a while. It's gone. So here's something I did. I also looked up what happened with Shakespeare during the plague, and I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I found out. I came across this article on The Stage, and it quotes an author called William Baker, who wrote a book called William Shakespeare. And in it, he says that in the decade from 1603 to 1613, he says the total theatrical closures due to the plague accumulated to a grand total of 78 months. That's 6.5 years in that decade of not making theatre due to plague. And in that same article, there's a gentleman named Neil McGregor, who is the director of the British Museum. And he says, Shakespeare's life from its very beginning was marked by plague. His career was shaped by it. In 1564, shortly after Shakespeare's birth, a quarter of the population of Stratford-upon-Avon died from plague. And then in 1592, theatres were shut. And with venues empty, apparently this was a time when Shakespeare wrote his 2 long narrative poems here, The Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. So he kind of was doing what we are doing right now. You're staying at home, reading, writing. And I mean, he pivoted. He took his existing skills and he did something else. Are you seeing your colleagues in theatre using their existing skills and, you know, adapting that to different kinds of work?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a lot of movies movies being made. There's pieces of text being written. I've been writing, which I never do, and I've actually stuck it out and finished the first draft, which I've never done before.
Hey.
Yeah. So we are finding the space to do this, because there is nothing else. There is just about being quiet at home, and I also have to say that a lot of people, like when we do the school run, because Freddie's in school in just down the road in a place called Waitakere, and there was a young dad that we made friends with, and he was really stressed at the beginning of this shutdown, and he was like, oh my God, because he was imagining, a great deal of sort of trouble financially and everything else. And all of those things are still there. The financial difficulties were still there. But one thing was that he said, I finally got to rest. I actually feel like I really needed a good rest. And there's a lot of tiredness that has sort of come to ground, and sort of people just, I don't know, I think we were all functioning at sort of breakneck speed, and really being pushed very hard. And I think that there's been some respite. I mean, this is all very sort of, in very privileged circles. I understand it's all people who have roofs above their head, and food for the immediate future, and all of that stuff. But there is a large section of that kind of middle class society that seems to have kind of gone, oh my God, this is actually quite a relief to just stop. And they would never have had the courage to do that, or the wherewithal to do that of their own steam.
No, of course not. So,
yeah. So
okay, we've got a couple of questions, Thusitha, so I'm just going to ask them right now. The first question is from Deshan Tennagon, and he says, in the production where you played 11 characters, how do you inhabit 11 different minds in one evening? How deeply do you need to know each character?
The quick answer is, curiously, not that deeply. You just have to really commit to the circumstances of the scene, and you know what the character wants from that scene. And I would know things like how old they are, who they are, what job do they do or not. There was a tiny child in there as well. And then where are they from? Where are they from? And what, and that's it. And in a strange sort of way, because one of the things about that show was that everything had to be really at breakneck speed. There was no hiatus. It just kind of went crashing through for an hour and a half, and then it finished. And so there's no sort of deep breaths and assuming limps and doing stuff to denote different characters and physicalities. You just have to think of it as one long song, and each note has its own sort of its shape, its tenor, its blueness, all of that has to be digested, and you just have to trust it and just go for broke, and that's what you do. And it worked out. It worked out quite well, and you didn't have to sort of sit and work out what they had for breakfast and all of that stuff. That's kind of what you actually do on stage together, two actors together. What has to happen, what the scene is about, is the most important thing, I think. And the less neurosis you engage with about who you are, because there's a kind of like I think it's quite a stumbling block, the inquiry into who characters are and their internal life and stuff. If you don't manage that quite carefully, you can sort of engender this enormous neurosis in yourself, which actually stymies any kind of elan and freedom and just that kind of courage that is required to just trust trust the play, sit on the play, and just play the actions and the scenes really strongly. So yeah, so not very deeply, just understand and go, yeah.
Yeah. And there's another question from Tehani Chitty. And she says, the more you work, the more you learn and grow as an actor. How do you continue this learning process when there are long gaps between work?
I think you'd sort of try and find ways of engaging with the craft, find your personal sort of way in somehow. Some people do a lot of singing and composing songs and stuff like that. All of this is extremely valid. They're sort of expressions with very nuanced and sophisticated form, attached, where you sort of have to. So I think you just have to. I mean, in America, they're crazy about sort of going for classes when they're not working. They're very, very disciplined about that. And in England, not so much, partly because of cost. I don't, but in America, if you're a serious actor, you do not sit around at home. You go to you do your waitressing job and you funnel that money into classes. And they are very, very sort of hardcore about that. But there are ways of, I think you just have to sort of stay inspired or try and find the inspiration. Try and understand what it is that inspires you particularly, and not, sort of individual, the person that speaks to you or the thing that speaks to you is very, very important to find. That's. I think if you don't have a sort of a structured framework in which to fit into, i.e., if there aren't, ready drama classes and things available, you just have to go searching for yourself. And to be perfectly honest, yes, you have the safeguards. You have a sort of a sense of, oh, I'm doing something if you join a class. Whereas if you're on your own, beavering away at something on your own, you feel less validated in some way. But actually, the latter is perhaps the more powerful thing to do. So.
All right. Thank you very much for those questions. We're nearly out of time, really. So I'm going to ask Thusitha to read something to us, something that sort of, we're asking all our guests, really, to read something to us that resonates with them right now.
Okay, so this is not it's a very famous book by a man called Viktor Frankl, who's a psychotherapist and a neurologist, and he was it's called Man's Search for Meaning, and I think a lot of people probably have come across it. It's a very beautiful book, because he was put in a concentration camp during World War II, and he very unexpectedly survived. And he talks about something very moving and perhaps quite pertinent here, which is about needing meaning in order to live, which is probably something that we are all kind of circling around at the moment. Mm-hmm. So it goes. Tell me if this is too long and I'm just rabbiting on and you want me to stop, okay? I'm just going to start reading.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So it says, I once had a dramatic demonstration of the close link between the loss of faith in the future and this dangerous giving up. F, my senior block warden, a fairly well-known composer and librettist, confided in me one day, I would like to tell you something, Doctor. I have had a strange dream. A voice told me that I could wish for something, that I should only say what I wanted to know, and all of my questions would be answered. What do you think? I asked. that I would like to know when the war would be over for me. Do you know what I mean, Doctor? For me, I wanted to know when our camp would be liberated and our sufferings come to an end. And when did you have this dream, I asked. In February 1945, he answered. It was then the beginning of March. What did your dream voice answer? Furtively, he whispered to me, March 30th. When F told me about his dream, he was still full of hope and convinced that the voice of his dream would be right. But as the promised day grew nearer, the war news which reached the camp made it appear very unlikely that we would be free on the promised date. On March 29th, F suddenly became ill and ran high temperature. On March 30th, the day of his prophecy had told him that the war and his suffering would be over for him. He became delirious and lost consciousness. On March 30th, he was dead. To all outward appearances, he had died of typhus. 1 second. To those who know how close the connection is between the state of mind of a man, his courage and hope, or lack of them, and the state of immunity of his body, will understand that the sudden loss of hope and courage can have a deadly effect. The ultimate cause of my friend's death was that the expected liberation did not come, and he was severely disappointed. This suddenly lowered his body's resistance against the latent typhus infection. His faith in the future and his will to live had become paralyzed, and his body fell victim to the illness. And thus the voice of his dream was right, after all. The observations of this one case and the conclusion drawn from them are in accordance with something that was drawn to my attention by the chief doctor of our concentration camp. The death rate in the week between Christmas 1944 and New Year's of 1945 increased in camp beyond all previous experience. In his opinion, the explanation for the increase did not lie in the harder working conditions or the deterioration of our food supplies or change of weather or new epidemics. It was simply that the majority of the prisoners had lived in the naive hope that they would be home again by Christmas. As the time drew near and there was no encouraging news, the prisoners lost courage and disappointment overcame them, and this had a dangerous influence on their powers of resistance, and great numbers of them died. As
Let's
we did
stop there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I think, yes, don't die. Keep just remain in good spirits. No, that was lovely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I want to say a couple of, wait, let's not finish there. Just 3 more sentences.
I'm not going. Let's do 3 more sentences. Yeah.
Yeah. What was really needed was a fundamental change in our attitude towards life. We had learned ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We need to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who are being questioned by life daily and hourly.
And that is how we give meaning to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thus, what has it been like in lockdown in New Zealand? What has your experience been?
We are very rural where we are. There aren't that many people about. But having said that, so we are quite remote. But having said that, it feels very peaceful. There have been lots of incidents. There's been a spike in domestic violence. There have been a huge upsurge of crime and breaking into cars and all sorts of things. But it's been quite well managed. And we have felt very privileged and very lucky because everything has been thought through, and there is a certain amount of care coming from the government towards its citizens that is actually makes you quite weak at the knees, because it's not riven through with an agenda. It just is trying to protect you and trying to sort of stave off a calamity. So it's been pretty extraordinary in that sense.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite been the same here in Sri Lanka. And, a lot of things are kept from us. And then suddenly we have these massive spikes. And I'm like, oh, my God. But yeah, I mean, we are sort of, I think the kind of care, if I can call it that, which it isn't, has been missing here in that sense.
Very much so.
And there's a couple of messages coming in for you. Thusitha, there's one from Andre Housen thanking you for the reading. And there's also another one here. I don't know if you can see it.
Very lovely. From, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, we could go on chatting, but I'm gonna stop it right here and say thank you very much for joining us.
This is the bedtime book. That it's very nice, and it's called
The Chicken Chronicles.
Yes,
by Alice Walker.
Lovely. Yeah, I should have read you this actually, but instead of the Man's Search for Meaning, because this is very soothing.
Is it? Do you fancy reading a page? Or less than a page? Just open
less
up.
Than a page. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So this chapter is called "What Do Chickens Like to Do?" And it starts, and it says, "They like to take naps. I would not have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Not only do they like to take naps, they like to take naps together. They especially like to take naps in the afternoon when the weather is hot. This summer, there were many very hot days, 105 to 110, a bit like yours now. I've learned the trick of jumping in the pond with my clothes on and leaving them to dry. Cheap air conditioning. Or I will lie in a hammock in the shade with a wet towel for a sheet. The chickens, though, burrow into the earth as far as they can, kicking aside the straw, and they will make a circle of all their special friends, and they will slowly nod off. Aww. It is enchanting to watch them do this. There will be the most sumptuous quiet, as if the whole world were feeling drowsy."
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, that is that is a much better note to end on. Thank you. Thus, it was lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for appearing on Theatre in the Apocalypse.